Hello, and welcome to our next
Hello.
installment of Wonder Woman Wednesdays. Hello, Meg.
Hello.
My guest today is Meg Buzzi, Buzzi, depending on
Buzzy,
your cultural
Bootsy.
background.
Yeah,
Yeah.
depending on which continent you're on.
So nice to see you. You are joining me today from LA, which I think is having record heat or something today.
Yes, we've had really cold, wet weather for about a month, and then all of a sudden it went from 60 degrees to like 90. So yeah, we're in a heat wave for the next several days, which is sad because all of our beaches are closed, so we can't go there right
Yeah.
now, but it's okay. We're staying home and being obedient.
Okay, good, good, good. Um, I have lots of questions to ask you, but before we started recording, you said something that just triggered my mind. You said that the food industry is just one system that probably has to fail, and you're all about systems. And we're seeing
Yes.
systems falter all around us.
Yes.
And I agree with you. There's a few that I'm very happy to see that are falling apart, and I'm hoping that will stay that way because it's just like, you know what, they need to be done and over and we need to move on with our lives. So before we actually give your background of who you are, I'm curious to hear from you about what are you seeing in the system? What are you experiencing with this craziness around us?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about collapse. And specifically, I've been thinking about what are all the good things about systems collapsing or systems failing, and what is all the value we can find in those fail points. Acknowledging that there's a lot of suffering that goes on when these systems fail, but there's also a lot of suffering just happening all around us. So it's sort of, how do we hold and recognize and respect the bad parts of the collapse or the suffering that it causes, but then also lean into the things that feel inherently creative or possible. Like there are opportunities to reframe the meta, which is talking about the systems that we actually work inside, how we interact with one another, how we create our daily lives are based on all these systems like food, transportation, education, trade, all these things. So I think we're seeing collapse at all these different points. And I think there's a real opportunity to shift our mindset about what does it mean when they crumble and what do we replace it with?
Hmm. Yeah, it'll be an interesting few months and interesting few years, I think. And hopefully we will learn from them. And the right
Absolutely.
systems will collapse. Fingers crossed.
Yes, or yes, building the new always, sometimes requires a wrecking ball
Hmm.
in the beginning.
That's the truth, yeah. Anyway, thanks for that. So,
Yeah,
welcome.
thank
We are
you.
here today because you are a Wonder Woman who's done a ton of really, really cool stuff. And this series is all about showcasing women like you so that the rest of us can get to know you and learn what makes you tick and hear about your journey.
All right.
So, yeah, where do we start? You have had a very interesting career. And right now, honestly, so when I looked at your online presence and I looked at your LinkedIn, you're wearing a lot of different hats. You're writing and
Yes, yes.
podcasting and teaching and coaching. And you know what? Why don't I let you talk and tell us what do you actually do right now and how did you get there?
Yeah. So I think actually you hit on one of the things that's been like a central challenge or struggle for me over the past 20 years is really having a word to describe all the things I do. Or we used to call it polymath. People used to call it polymath, like people who do all kinds of things, or we call it a Renaissance person or what have you. But so I think the easiest way to talk about what I do is to just talk about emergence. So emergence is when you're noticing what's coming up that might be unexpected or different or a change to the pattern or a jog, a glitch in the matrix, what have you, things that are coming up that are popping, right? And I'm really interested in what are the edges of things. So what's emerging, and whether that's in education or in technology, what have you. And so, yeah, so part of the struggle in describing what I do is that a lot of what I do is I look for what's new. And to do that, I look at the space between disciplines. So the liminal space, that intermediate space, whether it's between time periods or between disciplines or between industries. I went to school for poetry, and at the same time for evolutionary theory. How that informs my work now is that I'm just very interested in semantics and picking things apart and how things function, again, at a meta level, sort of at a philosophical level. How are these systems working or not working? So after school, I lived in Africa for a long time, doing work, doing evolutionary theory work, doing work, fossil digs and bone excavation and skeletal analysis. And I recognized in those moments that I was just much more of a people person, and being in a lab all day or being down in a cave wasn't where I could be best sort of my best self. And so I will say that of all of my various academic experiences and the things that I learned in school, all of that prepared me for a career in technology. And so I'll say, I think as a general statement, most of my career has been working in bringing technology to old structures. So I've worked in higher ed for a long time. I also worked for the court system of a state. I worked for a federal agency. I've worked for lobbying agencies at the federal level. And the thread through all of this is just, how do we understand our system, and how do we try to apply new technology to resolve the friction, or to resolve where we think things aren't working the way they ought to be. And I think last thing I'll say about my background is what makes me different from other people working in technology, or I will say the people that I'm attracted to that are also working in technology, have this liberal arts background or have this non-technical background that provides a behavioral context for how technology appears and how it functions. So for a lot of us, we think putting in a piece of software is a technical project or a technical endeavor. And for me, my career has been about showing people that putting in a technical system or implementing technology is a people issue and a behavior issue, and above all, an emotional issue, which is kind of an unpopular view, I think. But to me, what marks the difference between lasting change and just an empty gesture is people's ability to feel the change and to be committed to it. So sorry that was so long-winded, but I guess that's kind of, yeah, where I am. So I'm at I'm at the intersection of people and systems, and what happens when people hit up against systems. And for most of us, systems mean technology right now, because even the way we interact with our government is through software.
Mm. As you're talking, I'm getting some PTSD.
Oh no!
No. It's cracking me up, because you talked about software being and change being emotional, and
yes,
I spent just over a glass of wine one day. I will come to LA and we'll have a bit of a session.
Please. Yes.
But it comes to mind when I used to work in insurance, and my entire time that I was there for 5 years in that company. And it was basically a big system, a software system change the entire time. And emotional is just one nice way of describing it.
Right. Right. And the
I
same
totally get
people,
it.
I'm guessing you probably had this experience, but when you look to see the people who are having the most intense emotional reaction to the change are often the people who can least see that they're having an intense emotional reaction to the change. Or they might be the same people who are saying, but this is just software. This is just software. And you're like, but no, this is like you changing your whole behavior of how your whole day goes in this workplace.
Yeah.
Of course, that's going to be, I don't know, agitating or uncomfortable.
Meg, this is a big rabbit hole.
Yeah, well, it is. Yeah. So yeah, let's go to your other questions because it is a whole rabbit hole.
Not necessarily for you, but for me, I think I'm going to get emotionally attached to this conversation. Um, when you're dealing with, you work with in systems, you talked about change, you talked about emotions. What about biases? One thing that I've always thought or encountered in those situations is just as there's some people who are completely emotional about this kind of stuff, there are some that just completely are just hard-headed. Forget emotional or not emotional. They're so set in their ways, they're so set in their point of view. Good luck having behavioral change. They just don't see it because for them it's not an option.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing I would say right off the bat is for them, it's also emotional. They're just not awake to it yet. Maybe it's so emotional for them that they can't even confront it at all. And so they shut down. I see that a lot with leaders who see the writing on the wall and there's something about it that they can't confront. But yeah, so point of view is incredibly powerful. And I would equate point of view also with this idea of mindset. So when we confront change, it's so much about what our mindset is and whether we are aware of our mindset, self-aware. So, and you know, there's a spectrum. On one side of the spectrum is a fixed mindset, like you're describing. A fixed mindset is a rigid point of view that's like, this is just how it is. White is white, black is black. This is how it is. It's always going to be the F12 key. It's always going to be this website, whatever it is. On the other end of the spectrum, of course, is what we call a growth mindset, which is anything is possible. There are no limits. The only limits I put in place are ones that I have put there with my beliefs or my opinions. And so, you know, most of us exist toward one end of the spectrum, but it is a wide spectrum. And I think that right now, in the time we're in, the challenge for everybody who is working is how can I maintain a growth mindset during this time? To create ease, to sort of lubricate all of this unknown stuff we're going through, all of this unpredictable stuff. It's like inviting people into a point of view that's more like surfing or balance beam or tightrope than it is feeling certain. Yeah. And I also
So when you
don't,
oh.
yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, like, when someone tells me they're certain, I never believe it. It's like,
they can be decisive, maybe, but not certain.
For sure.
How do you, when you work with your coach, when you work with teams or leaders, what are the kinds of things that you do to help people shift from the rigidness to the growth mindset?
Yeah. One of my favorite exercises, and I'll just, you know, plug my coaching methodology a little bit. It doesn't belong to me, but there is, you know, sort of the gold standard coaching methodology that comes out of the Coaches Training Institute, which was like the first accredited program. And it's like the program that built ICF's credentials, the International Coaching Foundation. So one of their core pieces of work is this exercise of trying on a variety of points of view or perspectives, and being rigorous in doing this exercise where you're forcing yourself into these other perspectives over and over and over as you look at a particular problem or situation. And I think that helps us so much develop our own resilience and flexibility, seeing that our point of view is just one point of view. And that there are so many other things available to us when we move 2 degrees to the right or 2 degrees to the left, or we stand up instead of sitting down. So some of what I do with management teams and leadership teams is just helping them play with other perspectives. Yeah, and getting them to a place of discomfort, because that's where novelty happens. Novelty happens when we're like, we don't know what's going to happen.
So right now, I feel like a lot of us are in a place of discomfort. What do you think is going to happen as a result?
Yeah.
Predict the future for me, please.
Yeah. Well, one thing I predict is that people who already have a growth mindset are going to come through this experience with less stress. And it's important to note, it's a choice. We are making a choice about how we want to feel during this time, while also recognizing it's a huge privilege to be thinking about that. I mean, I just want to say, like, I can feed my family. We have a roof over our heads. We are healthy. All of those things go without saying. So I just want to say I acknowledge that, and that's an enormous privilege. If we set that part to the side, my prediction is that the people who will succeed the most in whatever the new normal becomes are the people who can continue to practice self-awareness and identify new opportunities out in the environment. Opportunities to connect, either to connect ideas or to connect people. That's kind of my prediction. I think a lot of people, however they've been for the last couple years, is going to be an indicator of how they might be another year from now. But yeah, it's a huge opportunity if we can stay focused on the things we want and not all the things that aren't the way we want.
Yeah, that's true for a lot of things, isn't it? In life in general, focus on the things, on the positives.
But now, yeah. And I think the difference now is obviously the intensity has increased and the scale of it has increased.
Yeah.
And there's this new sense of like, we're all in the same boat together at the moment, because the particular challenge we face in some ways has leveled the playing field.
I'm curious to hear a little bit about, sorry, I'll rewind. So one thing that I just trying to verbalize it. I told you my energy is a little bit, I know I look nice and but my brain is connecting everything today.
You do look extremely glamorous. I'm just going to say,
thanks.
I love your eyeshadow. It's amazing. I always want to know how to do that. I don't know how to do that, so I always appreciate it. Other people that know how to do it.
I've been learning. I've been playing around with it during the quarantine. That's
I
was going to say
it's a good time to learn that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. That's beautiful.
Thank you. But one thing that's been coming up for me a lot lately is just how many things we take for granted. And what I'm very happy about is I've always had high self-awareness, and I think because of my upbringing in communist Poland, I have a different appreciation for certain things than, others do. And I'm sure I don't appreciate plenty of others. I'm not living in poverty in Africa and never have either, for example. So, there's a spectrum. But
Yeah.
what's been interesting for me is these like conflicting thoughts that I'm getting, where I hear somebody say something about, the difficulty that they're in right now. And part of me wants to sympathize. Part of me is, the coachy, unconditional, positive regard person. And the other part is like, I want to smack them in the face and be like, shut the F up. Like, you do not understand how good you have it. And I know that neither one is the right answer. They're both the right
Yes.
answer. But I'm not really sure I'm trying to ask you. I mean, I know you understand systems. We talk about connections
Yeah.
and emotion, and you did this, I think it was last year summer, you did this fabulous fellowship in Italy around nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I just, I keep wondering about the things we take for granted, both in terms of the human connections, in terms of what we're doing to our earth. Part of me most of me really wants that some of the things that have happened, that they stay this way. People are, posting photos of nature coming back, of smog going down. Surely we want it to stay this way. Surely we've realized that all the things we thought we needed, we actually don't need, because look, we're still here. Yes,
Yes.
there's a
1,000%.
20% unemployment in the US. I'm not talking about that. Restaurants will eventually reopen, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not talking about completely disregarding what bad has happened. But
Right. Right.
anyway, just keen to hear your thoughts, because it's something that's been on my mind quite a bit in the past few weeks.
Yeah, well, as you're saying it, like I completely relate to that. And as we talked about mindset, that spectrum between growth and fixed, I also feel like sometimes when I'm working with clients, there's another spectrum, which like for me, which is on the one hand, like this compassion, like you said, this like nurturing compassion and acknowledgement and support, unconditional support. And on the other hand, there's this like tough love element of saying the real thing or saying the hard thing. And that's something that I work with leaders about a lot, because while they might feel comfortable supporting their teams and being the cheerleader, sometimes it's really hard to take that other end of the spectrum and say, like, here's where I've got to give you some tough love, whether that's critical feedback or if it's saying, hey, actually, you're not looking in the mirror. Like, here's what I see this thing. What do you think about that? Which I think, to your point, the whole world has a mirror in front of it right now. And it's like, oh, here's some things we appreciate and some things that, wow, we didn't appreciate enough. So how do you make that balance? I think always I try to start with compassion. And from that place of compassion, invite people into a new sense of accountability for their own behavior, thoughts, ideas. So I guess your original question, like how do we deal with that? I think the tough love piece is also always bringing it back to the question of like, and how do you contribute to this thing that doesn't work anymore? How are you contributing to that? And how might you instead be part of a solution or part of a new way? Because sometimes when people are in their legitimate like grief, self-pitying, misery, this is something we all do, we're comforting ourselves. In those moments, I think it's also important to ask, how do we contribute to the mess? And through that process of accounting for our own part of it might give us a new perspective on how we can shift. That's just one. I mean, I don't propose to have the answers. I just That's what I think of. When I think of tough love, I think of like, how do we frame it so that you can begin to take deeper responsibility for yourself?
Mm. You're a mom. You have a
Yes.
12-year-old daughter? Yes. I'm not a mom, but through Coacharia, we've just started, yesterday actually, we started this series on parenting
Oh,
to try
cool.
to apply coaching into parenting. And
Oh, I love
it's
that.
interesting learning experience. Yeah, so we had a webinar yesterday on parenting teens. And as you're talking, what I'm remembering is a few things similar that came up in the webinar yesterday.
Ah, okay.
And this idea of holding up a mirror and leading by example, etc. And I'm just, well, first of all, I'm curious, how do you practice what you preach, or do you with your daughter?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
also, you know, I look at the Gretas of the world, and I look at a lot of the kids that I encounter in my life, and they're so much better than my generation was. They're so much better than my parents'
Oh,
generation.
yeah.
Like, it gives
I
me
feel
hope
that.
that these kids just know what the heck they're doing. But
Mm,
if, as parents, as the older generations, if we're not the ones responding to what we see in the mirror, what are the kids to do? Again, I don't know
mm-hmm.
what the question is, other than
Mm-hmm.
how do you parent your daughter. But I feel like the mirror, we have the mirror already, but we think we need another one, um, that the kids are holding up. And I think as a society, if we listen to kids more right now, I think we'd be in better shape long term.
Yeah. Well, yeah. One thing I want to say is just like, man, kids are so resilient and we lose it as we grow older. We don't have to. We can gain it back at any time. So I tell my clients that all the time, that that resilience is available to you again and again. You can get back to that place. It's, again, it just comes back to mindset. But there is this part about parenting ourselves. I think in some ways the advice, the great parenting advice, or this idea of like holding up a mirror, leading by example, is just as relevant for teens as it is to any of us. Um, and I coach my kid the way, not that I coach her, but I behave with her the same way I would with my clients, when she is in a struggle, say around, oh, here's one all kids have, like there's a group project and somebody's not pulling their weight.
Mm.
It's really no different than grown-up times. That happens all the time, right? You have to do a cross-team project and the colleagues on the other team aren't picking up the slack or whatever. I mean, this happens constantly. So again, I try to really focus her back in on, what does she need? What is she accountable for? What's important to her about the project? And so as we lead by example, we are just a reflection of our own limiting beliefs. Like, we are only as good as the beliefs that we have about what's possible. So if I go into that discussion with my daughter thinking I need to micromanage this, then that's what she's going to learn and pick up and take to her friends. Oh, I need to micromanage this project. In terms of my own practice, the things that are non-negotiable now is I do a long morning meditation, and that I specifically do because I feel like that is going to give space and resources to my clients so that my best thinking comes through. I also do morning pages. So I do a free write every morning. And those are things that I have also given to my child as practices. Like, here are some practices that create structure in your day so that you are feeding yourself, like you're sort of feeding yourself cognitively, like giving yourself a little breathing room. Did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, no, that definitely does. And look, I don't even know there was a question. It's more a discussion.
But yeah,
Because she
but I
focused
think it's all about
on it.
beliefs. Like, if you have
Yeah,
your own, if you have your own hangups, you will pass those along, whether they're your
yeah,
employees or your children.
yeah. People, whoever sees you as in some
Like
sort
an
of, well, I'm not
authority.
supposed to say authority, yeah. But I don't use the word
Yeah.
authority because that always
Right,
Um,
right, 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 right.
talk talk to me about morning pages. You mentioned morning pages. I love morning pages. I've never
Yes.
journaled. It drives me bananas, but then I learned about morning pages and I love them. And I mentioned to people
Same.
and they're like, what is that? Talk to me about that so people who are
Yeah,
watching this can also partake.
absolutely. Well, yes, I also hated journaling. And I went to graduate school for writing. So I've, written things by hand my whole life, like many of us. Um, Morning pages gives me permission to do a couple things that don't feel like journaling. One is you're allowed to be completely stream of conscious. So you do not have an agenda with the writing. Uh, and that is very freeing to me. So I'm not trying to write about my feelings. I'm not trying to write the next great American novel. I'm not trying to write whatever it is. There is no try, there is only do, to quote Yoda. So
Do
you're
or do not.
just
There is no try. If you're gonna
oh,
do it, do
right,
it
right.
correctly.
That's what it is. The idea is like you literally just give yourself permission to be stream of conscious, even if what comes out is gobbledygook and not grammatically correct or doesn't make any sense. The other permission it gives you is you're not even supposed to ever read it again. You could burn it. You could throw it away. You don't have to keep it. It's not a legacy. It's not precious. That's important. Sometimes when we write something, we feel like it has to be like put on a podium somewhere or under glass. This is like, you might never have to see it again. You're doing it for digestion. And Morning Pages comes from the book, The Artist's Way, which was written about 25 years ago by a film writer, a screenwriter. And yeah, so basically Morning Pages is one of the key practices that just allows you to clear your head. And if you're doing it by the book, then you do it literally the second you wake up, before your mind starts filling with other things, before you reach for the phone, before you check the news, before you get involved in the chaos of whatever the morning routine is. So it's really just another type of meditation.
I was told that it's 2 pages. Is there a rule that you go by for your morning pages?
Yeah, the original, the book says 3. So the book says
Okay.
three pages one side, handwritten, and handwritten is important. I think a lot of us find it much easier to type, but the handwritten, again, this is part of like the neuro processing that happens when you physically write something. So physically writing it, pen and paper, the old analog way, 3 sides, single space. So
Cool. Thanks for that. I love morning pages. I've been
yeah,
advocating them for
yeah, yeah.
ages.
I
Glad it came
forget.
out.
I don't remember how many words that ends up being, but I guess you could cheat by having a smaller notebook.
You know what? That's how I thought I was, but smaller notebooks have smaller lines. So
This
what
is
it's done
true.
for me too is I ended up getting nice paper, like really smooth Japanese notebooks, so it's pleasant to write.
Oh, oh yeah.
Yeah. And with the dots too. Oh,
Pen
so
and the
nice. And I
paper.
have a good
Yeah.
colorful pens. And I don't cheat. I have never read my morning pages, but it's nice to kind of just go and see all the different colors. So
Yeah, and
anyway.
I do think even if what you're writing is gobbledygook, I will say that the book has you like at the very end, like after you've been doing this for months, 3 months, 4 months, you can go back and revisit the stuff and you will find gems. There will be things in there that feel like really amazing.
Yeah. Maybe one day.
Maybe one day, exactly. But for now, you're too
I'm
close
not
to it.
ready.
Yeah, exactly.
I would be remiss not to talk about you being the goddaughter of a witch.
Oh,
It was in your
yeah, and you can see
bio,
my poster.
and then
Yeah.
tarot was also one of your skills. We got to talk about it.
Yeah.
Tell me.
So I think I told you both sides of my family are Italian immigrants. And on my mother's side, there are witches in my mother's family, like going up several generations, back in the old country.
The old country.
And my godmother, who is my mother's oldest sister, is a math professor, and also also has always had a coven, which I grew up as a kid thinking that was a completely normal thing for an aunt to have. And she always read my tarot from the time I was a kid, or for everybody in our family. I just grew up thinking it was completely, and my family, and I grew up Catholic. So it also was like, it's completely normal for an Italian Catholic family to also have a family witch who reads people's tarot cards. Of course.
I grew up the wrong Catholic. In Poland, we didn't have those.
I know. Well, yeah, I will say my husband is also Catholic. His family is German Catholic, and it's a very different scenario. But tarot does have its roots in Italy, and it's been around since like right before the Renaissance, I think, or like in the beginning of the Renaissance. So I see it as a tool, and I grew up with it as a tool for self-reflection and self-awareness that uses universal archetypes. And this idea of witchiness, which I think is, at least out here in LA, certainly experiencing a revival, is really people's desire to connect more with the natural world and use the natural world as a means to process their own experience and to really honor their relationship with nature as well. Which is sort of, if you go all the way back to the beginning of witches, was really just about worshiping the planet we live on, or honoring it, or, venerating it. Yeah. So it's always just been a big part of my family, and wasn't something that I felt I could ever really talk about or be public about. I'll be honest, until I moved to California, where there's just a lot more openness to these kinds of things. And I think I just felt finally like, okay, I'm just gonna bring all of myself to the table, which includes all those things.
I love it. I think it's so cool. And, for me, when I think about witches, I think about nature, and in history, also look at the apothecary type figure. I mean, a lot of times it's
the medicine woman,
etc. It's a medicine woman, exactly. And I think about magic a lot too. So
yes.
I'm a believer in magic, because Same. If you just look at history, how many things right now somebody from yesteryear would go like, oh my God, this is the highest magic of the highest sort. And dragons, look how many different cultures have the exact same creature that they just happen to describe. It's just I feel like, going back to a conversation on biases earlier, I just feel like there's just some biases that we have as societies, as people, as whatever, where we don't make the connections that these things are not they're not silly or funny. They're just understood differently by different people, but I think they relate to history. Anyway, I love it.
I love that you're saying that. I could not possibly agree more. And I actually think that it connects, your thing about biases or like these limiting beliefs just connects back to this idea we said a couple minutes ago, which is people are stuck in their points of view. So if I could wish anything for anybody during this time, it's to get unstuck from your point of view. Let this time allow you to slip into other perspectives. Because it is those connections you make when you travel to those other perspectives. I mean, you can see geographic travel, as an echo of that. When you go to a new country and you are uncomfortable and you're seeing this totally new point of view and perspective because they don't eat the same food, or they don't act the same way, or they don't go to the same church, whatever it is, that's what shifts you, and you begin to make connections. Oh, I'm gonna have these insights. I think it's this same idea, like magic is just what we haven't been able to explain yet. So it's just something that we don't have a perspective for yet. I also think there's like magic, for example, in science fiction, because I don't know if you know this, but satellites did not exist until somebody wrote a science fiction novel about it. And then NASA
Yep.
was like, oh, maybe we should try that. So there's this like generative, magical part of speculation and leaning into these other perspectives that can become real. So there's also this chance right now to like, so there's a writer named Adrienne Marie Brown who wrote a book a couple years ago called Emergent Strategy. And right now during this quarantine, she is hosting a writing project where she invites people to write speculative future fiction about what they would like to see happening as a means of helping to manifest ideas like satellites or whatever, but applying them to the situation we're in now.
Oh, I love it.
That magic and imagination can actually shift us into a point of view that allows us to see a solution we didn't see before. That just gives me goosebumps.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I will need to get that link from you, and I will share it in the episode notes because I have so many ideas.
Yeah, there's so many, and I'll share with you too, like her Instagram because it's an open call for anyone who wants to write.
Awesome.
Write.
My little sister has
futures.
been writing on a fantasy novel for many years now, and whenever I have a chance, I mention it because then I figure she will hear it and she will get some more pressure to finish the damn thing.
Yes, exactly. Well, maybe now's the time.
Maybe now's the time, exactly. Cool. Yeah, between Asimov and Sagan and Philip Dick, there's just so much innovation. Those guys knew what they were doing. Very cool.
Yeah.
But speaking of Instagram, you mentioned Instagram. So as part of my homework about you, I also looked at your Instagram.
Oh,
and
okay,
I have to ask.
Yeah.
Mayo Must. Why was Mayo Must even in your life?
Right.
Explain to people what it is.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. Okay. Real quick, there's just a tiny backstory here, which is that for some years I taught sophomore literature at the University of Iowa. And one of the exercises I used to have my students do, and they were really checked out. I mean, they were not literature majors. So they were like, okay, I have to get through this class. And one of the things I wanted them to do was go out into the world, and this was pre-smartphone, because I'm old and I was teaching them in a different decade, go out into the world and find examples of people taking liberty with language to sell something to you. And so I wanted them to look at ads in a new way. I wanted them to look at billboards. I wanted them to just be aware of the language around them and how people use it to impact you. And it's a habit that's never left me. So when I'm in a grocery store and I see something crazy, I have to take a picture of it, or I see something that's just, grammatically weird or whatever. And yeah, so I saw Mayo Must on the shelf, which for those of you who don't know is like this pre-mixed, it's just disgusting, but
looks disgusting. I'll put a link to it in the notes.
Of mayonnaise and mustard, which the world did not need to have. And what you may have not seen next to it was a pink pudding mix that was being marketed by the X-Men franchise. So again, it's just these sort of like moments of cultural weirdness where you're like,
why?
Wow, you're using a superhero to sell pink pudding, and next to it, you're combining mayonnaise and, so it's just one of those things where
Hashtag America.
Hashtag capitalism. Hashtag does everything need to be a product? Does it? I don't know.
I think I'm going to do this from now on too, because now it's going to put mind. Yeah, that was gross. I couldn't focus on anything else on your Instagram other than that. I want to ask you for advice for people that are watching this. So, at the very, very start, you had a hard time even explaining what you do because you do so many things. And
yes.
I think that's awesome because I do call myself a Renaissance woman because I can't think of another way of describing myself. Not necessarily because I'm doing so many things as you are, but shiny objects for me. Like I get interested in something and I do it, and there's no option to not do it well. So like I'm not going to. I will take up
So
something
you're
that
a
excites me.
perfectionist.
I'm a perfectionist in sense that no, I don't like failing. I'm competitive. I don't think I'm a perfectionist. I just don't like failing.
Okay.
So I can go on Amazing Race and MasterChef and Project Runway, and I can win all three. I don't know,
Yes, you can.
probably not, but yes, I can.
Yes, you can.
So, you know, for me, I know that the reason why I can do so many things and, you know, I tend to get excited and then just do it is because of my personality, but also because of how I was raised. You know, again, back to communist Poland, we did everything. So the things that I took for granted was the fact that when I was, you know, little 3-year-old, I would sit on my grandma's lap as she had her old Singer machine for sewing, where you had to with a foot pedal.
With the foot pedal, yep.
And yeah, or feeding the pigs with my grandpa to learn about the ecosystem, or tinkering with cars when my dad was fixing that, or uh, cooking with my mom. Just all these different things that I learned as a kid and just kept doing because of how I was brought up. But that's not a luxury a lot of people have. And I realize that more and more every day. And the other luxury people don't always have is, you know, just time or money. There's limitations that we have that aren't just internal or external. So what I don't want to come away from any of my interviews is that, oh, look at us, we're doing so much cool stuff, you are falling behind. You know, I want to cultivate a sense of possibility, but acknowledge the limitations. But do you have advice to people, women, especially women, because this is a Wonder Woman series? What steps can they take to try to get out of this comfort zone?
Yeah. Actually, yeah. Well, I also just want to say, like, I want to appreciate how articulate you are in describing that, because I think you did a really good job. I am going to disagree with one thing you said, which is we need to acknowledge our limitations. And I'm going to push back on that, because I think that we spend our whole lives having the world tell us we have limitations. And I think our culture does a great job acknowledging our limitations all the time. So why do we need to continue to do that? So there is a myth that to be grown-ups, to be adults, we need to, quote, be realistic or be practical. And that actually doesn't serve our dreams. I'm not saying there's not a place for that. I'm from the Midwest, so like, yes, I'm all about practical. I love practical things. Like, give me something useful, give me a tool, great, love it. When we want something bigger for ourselves, when we want to engage in our dreams, or we want to explore what our dreams even are, or we want to like stretch, that is not the time to acknowledge our limitations. That's the time to actually question our limitations. So when we say things like, well, but I have to work full time, so blah, 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 or well, I don't have enough money to do that, or well, my husband will never give me enough time with, you know, kid free to do blah, 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 blah. 90% of the time what I find with my clients is they never even asked for the thing. So they already supposed it was a limitation, and then they didn't even have the conversation with their partner to see if they could take the time. So part of my job is to call BS on all of that. And so my advice to women especially, because we are programmed to stay small. This culture, and I will say this culture, and I mean the whole world, is always going to want to put you in a box, because it's trying to make sense of the world. Reject it. What about the experiment of just rejecting it entirely and questioning every limiting belief that you have? So I had a belief I had to be working full-time and being the sole supporter for my family. I had all kinds of beliefs. Yeah, so I guess just don't believe everything you think.
I like
And
it.
yeah, and just like, to me, my quest right now with the teams, predominantly right now I'm working with teams, but I'm also working with a few individuals, getting them to a place where they can believe something bigger is possible. And that's what I hope for everybody, because I want everybody to get back to that place of their childhood, like you did when you were taking care of the pigs or wherever, where you felt like, I am really myself and I can really do what I want. That's the good,
I think
juicy
it's a
stuff.
lovely wish and a lovely hope, and I think it can happen. I mean,
I do too.
the last few months have taught us anything is that anything really is possible, and we're not going
Yeah.
to be ready for it, and that's what's exciting. Uh,
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
For sure. I mean, you've got to be talking to so many people now who are like, wow, I didn't realize I could do my job from home. Wait, why am I in this job? Things they never would have questioned even 3 months ago. Yeah.
yeah,
So there's a lot of fertile ground.
lots of hope. Love it. Thank you so much, Meg. Before we go, can you plug your podcast so people can listen to
Absolutely.
more
Yeah.
of you?
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Okay. Yes. So myself and another coaching colleague of mine do a podcast called Massively Useful Thing. It's based on sci-fi as well, on the Douglas Adams books, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because he always talks about how a towel is a massively useful thing. Well, we're kind of taking a more meta approach to that. You can find us on Apple or Spotify or SoundCloud under Massively Useful Thing. It's a very short podcast, so what's nice about it is we try to keep our episodes under 20 minutes, and we give you just a little piece of coaching advice or an exercise that you can do to, yeah, get more in line with what you actually want. So
Very cool.
thank
I'll make sure that
you
it's
so
going to be
much.
linked in the notes
Yes,
as well.
wonderful.
But Meg, thank you so much. The answer is 42.
Yes, that is the answer. Ta-da! We figured it all out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just want to thank you so much, because you are absolutely delightful to talk to, and I feel like we could talk for hours and hours. I now want to pick your brain about a million other things, and I think what you're doing is great. I think right now creating exciting content that invites people into a new way of thinking is just one of the best things we could do with our quarantine. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. And
Yeah.
thank you to everyone who is watching and or listening, because this will be a podcast too. The sound quality isn't always amazing, but it's a podcast.
All good.
So yeah, exactly. So thank you so much. And to anyone who's watching, come back next week for another amazing Wonder Woman. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.